Hello everybody, it's me, Fee, or White Zulu, and welcome to another reading from my autobiography of the same name. Now I left you with the school holidays. I'd survived one term at the St. Anne's College as a second former. Now that is standard 6. We worked in, as for some unknown reason, as a private school, we worked in forms rather than standards. So we had no first form. Standard 5 at the prep was that. And then standard 6 was second form, standard 7, third form, standard 8, fourth form, standard 9, fifth form, and standard 10, which is your matric year, sixth form. And that's when the prefects are chosen. And so I'm just putting that one straight so there's no confusion. And the servants are, the staff are unpacking our trunks. The other problem, which made Mum go on about, was about how much stuff was missing from the list of uniforms we'd taken with us. The school laundry staff were notoriously light-fingered, but Mum couldn't see this, as our staff never ever stole from us, and harangued and blamed us, especially me, as I was the most careless about losing expensive garments which she'd now have to replace, which she insisted they could ill afford on a farmer's income. She seemed to have forgotten that she'd stepped off a ski slope and onto a private yacht in the Mediterranean a couple of weeks before. Admittedly, I was always leaving my things lying about. I was in a perpetual daze, constantly had my nose in a library book, and, absent-mindedly, this gave rise to my nickname, the Professor, or just Prof, which still sticks today. All my class and former and lower classmates still call me Prof today. And I rather like it because you can have some really nasty nicknames. We had a girl called Smelly, we had a girl called Fatso, we had a girl called Piggy, and so on it went. So I was lucky with Prof. It was actually an affectionate one. I left my jerseys, blazers, and library books wherever I'd put them last. The school had a lost property box which was filled with garments, and the head girl used to stand at the top of the stairs while we lined up in the gym for our meals, chapel, or church, and call out the items she held up from the box. We each were allocated a number from 216 girls, and my number was 71. And that was constantly being aired for the world to see. Each time, 5 times a day or more, I had to traipse up in front of the school and reclaim my clothing. If one had lost items more than once a week, there were punishments of detention and more poetry or lines to be completed. My library books were always giving me heart failure because if they were late, I had to pay a fine, and if I lost it, pay for the book. And since Mum was such a bad sport about my losing things anyway, she'd have had apoplexy if I or she had to shell out for lost books on a regular basis. But fortunately, there was a system whereby kind-hearted girls would pick up missing books from under a tree in the grounds or a bench in the corridor where I'd been reading and return them to the library on my behalf, leaving me to pay only the fine. The second term ended and we had a lovely July holiday of 3 weeks. Me out on Rocket with the dogs every morning and a lively set of tennis in the early afternoons with the rest of the family. It was too cold to swim in the Umgeni River in midwinter, and the water level was so low anyway due to the dry season and lack of rain. My third term came, and reluctantly I dragged myself back into the school routine. We'd been back at school about 4 weeks when I was called out of class by one of the staff. In the main walkway near the chapel, I found my 2 older sisters waiting for me. Apparently Mum and Dad had arrived and wanted to tell us something. We got to the Pontiac, which was standing in the driveway, and Mum and Dad told us that our beloved grandpa had died, and then, having nothing else to say to us, they drove away. The 3 of us turned to go back to our classes, and then it hit home to me. I was 12 and my best friend in the whole world was dead. I burst into tears and began to sob quietly. My oldest sister hissed at me, "Shut up, stop crying. People like us don't cry." I stopped, shocked at her tone, and I didn't want a slap, which she would have given me if I hadn't. So we walked along in silence, me giving the odd hiccup now and again, back into class and to carry on as though nothing had happened. I didn't understand why I hadn't been allowed to cry. Other girls cried when their pets died. What made us so different? Grandpa's death affected me so badly that I began to sleepwalk, sometimes waking up from a vivid nightmare to find myself outside McCrory and in the main corridor. It was the winter term, and, like at home, there was frost on the ground outside. Hilton is also in the mist belt and has a similar climate to ours on the farm, but there is much more mist and no snow at all, although we could see snow on the Intlizan mountain range where Mbandla and our farm lay. Incidentally, this morning it's snowing outside, quite a blizzard going on. It's a pity I can't turn the screen and show you, but that would be too complicated. But it's very pretty. Looks more like a Christmas winter wonderland, even though it's mid-March. Early morning swimming was replaced by the inter-house gymnastics display, and McCrory held their practices on Saturday mornings on the hockey field. We rolled about in the dark at 6 o'clock in the frost, getting our black bloomers and thin cotton t-shirts muddy, while our coach, a prefect, shouted instructions to us through a bullhorn, or megaphone these days, I think. After that, we had to get changed and go to breakfast, our teeth chattering with cold. I kept getting one head cold after another, and then had a terrible dose of real flu, which sent me into the San again for another few days of starvation. Sister's vile concoctions and blissful rest with unlimited access to the day room bookshelf. Second formers, those of us in Standard 6, had to have their baths in the afternoons, as bathing at night was strictly reserved for the sixth formers. I spent my evenings getting colder and colder until bedtime came, and my feet were like blocks of ice. We had hot water bottles, but for some reason, the cheapest Mum could find, I suspect, mine always seemed to spring a leak at the beginning of term and had to be thrown away. I lay in bed shivering, and my lower legs, especially my feet, felt as if they'd been amputated from the knees down. Nothing, I tried, warmed them up. I put clothes around them, trying to improvise a pair of bed socks, but to no avail. I'd inherited Dad's poor circulation. Excuse me. We had Michaelmas holidays, 2 weeks in the spring, and then back for my last term in second form. Several weeks into the term, during lunch, just before grace was said, when Dot read out the names, now Dot was the dreaded Lady Warden, the names of girls she wanted to see after lunch, she called out, "Ross F., see me after lunch." I froze in shock, frantically searching my mind for what reason she wanted to see me. I cast my mind all over, trying to remember how many detentions I'd done, how many punishments I'd performed for the prefects, and the fact that I'd concussed the head of house some time back. The fact that Dot, of all people, wanted to see me was the most terrifying one, as it would never bode well for the girls whose names were called out. The other girls around me eyed me, some with curiosity and others with contempt. Mary looked at me with pity. My sisters turned to look the other way when I gazed at them beseechingly to try and get an inkling as to why I was being called up to see the head mistress. Perhaps I was going to be expelled. Oh God, that was it. Now, Dad would have to come and take me away in disgrace, and none of my family would ever speak to me again. That seemed to take forever, and my mouth was bone dry with nerves, so I didn't touch my food. When grace was said to end the meal, I walked over to Dot's study in the main corridor and stood there, my heart fluttering in my chest like a trapped bird. Hardly breathe with fright. I knocked timidly, and then when the green light came on over her door, indicating that I open it, I pushed it open slowly. Dot was seated, looking at something on her desk by the big sash window, which overlooked the front lawn. This was the first time I'd ever been into her study. "We have decided," she said coldly, after a long pause and with no preamble, "that you are to stay another year in second form. So we are keeping you back a year." I stared at her, dumbfounded, trying to understand the words. My first and only reaction was massive relief that I wasn't in trouble. "Thank you," I stammered, and stood there dumbly. "You may go," she said with the same chilly detachment with which she'd given me the first bit of news. I backed quietly, found the doorknob without really looking, and left the room, closing the door very carefully on my way out, just in case she'd changed her mind and had a punishment for me after all. The news that I was to spend another year in second form didn't sink in at all. And I carried on to the end of that term and the school year without giving it another thought. During the lovely long Christmas holidays out on horseback and playing tennis and swimming, again, not a word was said by either of my parents or even my sisters about this bit of news, so it slipped to the back of my mind. Years later, when I did ask Mum and Dad why I was kept down a year to repeat second form, they said dismissively, "Oh, you were too young for your class, as you went to school on your 12th birthday, and all the others in your form were at least 6 months older than you. Also, you'd missed so much work by being in the SAN that we thought it was better that you repeat the year." That's it. Neither they nor my former mistress, not even Dot, had thought to discuss the matter with me or even tell me what they'd planned. But that was so typical of the way our parents and the school staff handled things. Nicolette had dropped too many subjects to be able to write matric, so she left in 5th form, standard 9, the year after I arrived at the college. Dine was crafty and quietly dropped so many subjects that only after she'd done it, and the school wrote to Mum and Dad to tell them of the fact, did they and the staff realize that she wouldn't be able to take matric either. So she also dropped out in 5th form a year later. There was a lot of shouting about Diane's trickery, but the deed was done, and all they could do was yell at her for a bit and then complain over a gin and tonic about the shoddy quality of the teaching at St. Anne's. On my 13th birthday, Evelina once again packed my trunk, and Delia, Dine and I went back to St. Anne's College. Delia for her first term there, and Dine for her last. Nicolette went to a small residential finishing school in a small town called Kloof, near Durban. Arriving back at the college on my birthday meant I missed my school birthday. There was a tradition of the girls giving each other little gifts if their birthdays fell during the term. I'd seen the presents being exchanged and had myself given presents. The current rage in second form was tiny china animals, especially horses, as we were allowed to put those on display on our lockers, and I'd chosen the lovely little white horse ornaments which came with the crates of white horse whiskey Dad ordered by the dozen. I had about 6 of them and had wrapped them up in birthday paper purloined from Mum's drawer in Dad's huge desk. I never received any china ornaments, though, or anything else for that matter, at school on my own birthdays, as there was far too much going on with unpacking trunks and saying goodbye to parents for the extra long term which lay ahead. Mum and Dad went overseas again to ski with friends in Switzerland, followed by another Mediterranean cruise. After chapel and supper, when we were settling in the dorm, my old classmates popped their heads in to say hello, and the new girls looked at me with fresh eyes. I seemed to know a lot of girls, and I also knew what was going on and which bell meant what. That's it for the time being, and more of this to come. I hope you enjoyed it. Thinking back, it was utterly miserable, but now I have to laugh at a lot of the things. They were all self-inflicted. I want to thank John Moslane, my producer, for setting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I couldn't do it. And I also want to thank Sean van Vuren for uploading them to the internet. Sorry, my YouTube channel. He does a sterling job there. And if you want any more pictures and more information on my other books, which I've written, approximately 4 of them, please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And there's another bit coming later on in the week. Goodbye for now.